Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where we cultivate change from the inside out as we ponder the Cairo question. Will Cairo have to protest in his lifetime for the birthright to freely and peacefully exist in the skin in which he was born? We stand on the belief that dismantling racism goes beyond laws and legislation or politics and economics. Here, anti-racism activation is presented as an inside job where personal transformation and accountability impact social change. So take a seat at the anti-racism activation table with Inflection Point Podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. At Inflection Point Podcast, we are so dedicated to the art of listening in authentic conversation. We challenge our audience and one another to listen actively and intentionally for the purpose of increasing awareness, understanding, and ultimately transformation. So I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman. How are you?
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and welcome tonight.
Excellent, excellent. So we are going to have a book discussion this evening, and we put our heads together and selected a particular book that we wanted to kind of share with you. And so what we ended up doing was picking certain portions of this book. We each selected a chapter that really, really resonates with us on a personal level in terms of the anti-racism activation work that we do and all of that. And so I'm just going to jump right in because we got a lot of information that we want to share. So I want to make sure we have lots of time. So the book that we are discussing is I'm Tired of Racism: True Stories of Existing While Black by Sharon Hurley Hall. And I want to start off with a quote from the book. But before I jump into that, we're not necessarily focusing as much on the author this evening. We're really diving into the book, but you'll have a special treat because in our next episode, we're going to actually have the author come on and we'll dive even deeper into what she set out to do when she wrote this book. So I am going to start by reading a quote that comes from the book. And this is the foreword from the quote, which was written by Ashanti Maya Martin. And I quote, "We both found reward and enjoyment in these careers, but in 2020, it suddenly wasn't good enough. Our paths intersected right around the moment that the two of us and so many others began to wake up, became determined to align our creative and intellectual capital with the pursuit of facing racism head on, finally, pointedly, specifically, and loudly. No hedging and no more being quiet." And this is a reflection of where the two individuals were. So this is part of their George Floyd origin story, where that incident sparked so much activity in them. And one of them was this book that Sharon Hurley Hall has written. She's an activist, a journalist, and just this incredible global citizen. And so we're going to kind of pick her book apart a little bit, if you will. So the chapter that I'm focused on is a chapter that is entitled, "Let's Discard the Notion." Now, there are 33 chapters in this book that address some very specific ideas and topics, not in a heavy-handed way, but in a direct kind of way. So these 10 notions, let's discard the notion, there are 10 of them. And these are basically ideas that need to be unlearned, sort of unlearning, committing to anti-racism and not stressing out your Black friends. And the reason that really resonated with me is because I often don't believe that people have a deep enough understanding of how stressful dealing with racism can be for Black folks. And oftentimes when individuals don't kind of have that more in-depth knowledge, it kind of, people can come across as being superficial. And that is the last thing that you want if you're considering going down this pathway of allyship, is to come across as superficial. So I'm going to actually read what she said about this particular notion. Let's discard the notion that when Black people tell white people to Google stuff about racism before asking a Black person, that they are being unhelpful or shutting down the conversation. That's not exactly what is happening. And this is what Sharon goes on to say. We are simply asking you to do some of the work on the front end as a basis for a more informed conversation about race, racism, and anti-racism. And so she goes on to compare it to if you're dealing with an illness or you're something about your health or maybe your weight or something. The first thing you might do is go and Google it and gather some information. And as they say, you're doing some research. And so what this notion is really stressing is just the idea of taking upon yourself, taking that accountability on yourself to start learning on your own, because that is the first step towards doing the work. So if you're one of those people who is out there and you're thinking about this whole thing of allyship and getting involved on a deeper level, that's one of the first things that you want to do is really begin to educate yourself. And I think the times that we're living in right now, there are so many avenues for you to begin to educate yourself so that when you enter into the conversation, you're coming across as somebody who intentionally got some information on their own. And now you might want to deepen your awareness or deepen your understanding of that information, which now enables you to be able to engage in a conversation because you've already dug a little bit deeper on your own. So that's one of the first things you want to kind of think about, is that you just can't go around picking the brains of Black people and just expecting them to be able to explain something to you just like that. It just doesn't work like that. It's painful, it's stressful, and we don't want people who are attempting to be allies to be adding on to that stress and that pain. Okay, so let's see what else she says. Let's discard the notion that your need for information trumps Black people's needs for self-care. Sometimes it's just too much, because dealing with racism isn't your experience, but it is our experience. It is my experience, and it can be very stressful. It can be very painful. And so this kind of ties into the very first notion, but it's also centered around this need for us to prioritize our own mental health and wellness as we're engaging in doing this work, as we're working with individuals who are trying to build and deepen their own racial literacy or their own historical literacy. We want to help you do that, but we don't want to do it at the detriment of ourselves and our own mental health and well-being. Okay. So let's see what else we have. Oh, here's a good one right here that really resonated with me. Let's discard the notion that your one Black friend or your one Black colleague, or your one Black coworker speaks for all Black people. Let's definitely discard that notion. And the reason being, because even when you look at the acronym BIPOC, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color, in a lot of ways that kind of rubs me together, because it takes all of these different individuals, these different groups, these different cultures, these different historical experiences, these different narratives, and kind of lumps us all together as if we're all basically the same. And that is so incredibly far from the truth. We are, in fact, individuals in the Black community, individuals in the Indigenous community, individuals in the people of color community. But it just doesn't serve anybody well when we just kind of get lumped into this one category. And the way I interpret that category, it's really kind of an interesting way of saying white versus non-white. And that doesn't really help us to get anywhere in doing this work, because it has to be about opening up those channels of communication, opening up those conversations, that those conversations are real, those conversations are meaningful. Okay, I'm going to share this last one, and then I'm going to open up the discussion with Mavis and Gail. And this last one is, let's discard the notion that when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean only Black Lives Matter. I cannot tell you how troubling it is for me personally when I recognize that that is the interpretation that people have. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is Black Lives Matter too. So it's not this zero sum. If you matter, that means I don't matter. That's not what this is about. That's not what equity is about. So let's discard that notion that somehow when we make that type of inference, or we use that term, that we're automatically saying that somebody else doesn't matter. Because the fact of the matter is, when you think about equity and inclusion, that's a message that says everybody matters, including Black people. Okay, so I'm not going to go any further, because I could spend the whole entire hour just talking about this stuff, but I don't want to do that. So Mavis and Gail, your feedback on some of the things, because some of this stuff is actually things that we've talked about as we built this allyship that we have here. Right. So I'd like to get your feedback.
Well, I think it's really important that you talked about how important it is for each of us that's white to be able to do our homework, to be able to do some our own research, and not just look to somebody that's Black to provide that for us, because it's not their issue, it's our issue, right? We have to take responsibility for that and really delve deep and within ourselves and within literature and within history to really understand and comprehend what this has always been really about. And that's not fair to put that on anyone that's Black. It's what we need to do for ourselves, I think, first. And then we can have the conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the conversation needs to be had.
Right, definitely. Yes.
Yes.
Maybe you would never come to the table without any information before you have a conversation with somebody, right?
Absolutely.
Your homework, right? You get some information.
Yeah. Well, I have to start out with an apology for stressing out my Black friends for forever, because I've had a certain level of curiosity. And I know I've asked some really silly questions. And, now, so first of all, I'm sorry, my friends, that I stressed you out and maybe asked things that were too personal. But now, since George Floyd, there is, as Anita is saying, there's so much information out there. I can find any number of sources. If some question comes to mind, I don't have to ask my Black friends. I do have to say, though, that sometimes when we're preparing for this podcast, Anita's the one who knows me well and knows my heart is about the only one who can really take me to one of the deepest levels. Because on, the first level, let's say first grade, things are pretty concrete. And as you go deeper and deeper and understanding what's happening in this world with respect to racism, it gets more and more subtle and more hurtful. So I just feel really blessed to have someone, this space too, where we can really delve into those issues. It's just been a beautiful thing.
And we've had some incredible conversations, but they were very honest and authentic conversations.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
really
to your point, Mavis, they're questions that take you deeper and deeper and deeper into yourself, number one, but also into the topic. Like I mentioned, like historical literacy and racial literacy, it takes you deeper and deeper into those types of topics to the point where you actually derive a benefit from that conversation.
Absolutely. I realized something this week, and that was that I keep thinking that I can learn enough about the Black community that I can feel like a Black person. But I know now that there is no way for a white person to fully understand that experience. That was big for me. I mean, it might sound kind of obvious, but I always feel like people should be able to come together, but we're all in different bodies with different life experiences and so on. So, but that doesn't mean that we can't open up ourselves and open ourselves to others to be able to live differently in the world. So that's what I'm going for.
Excellent. So that's actually a great segue into the next segment, which is your segment. So why don't you take the baton from there?
Great. So the chapter that I'm focusing on in Sharon Hurley Hall's book is called I Can't Ignore Racism, Can You? And the subtitle is There's No Getting Back to Normal Until Racism Ends. So sit with that for a minute. I was thinking about Jeffrey Robinson's film, Who We Are, how he says that in history, there have been several times where we've come and made a lot of progress, come up this hill toward really dealing with racism, and then we roll back. I want to just reiterate the commitment here in this space that we are going to keep pushing this forward because this is doable. We don't need to slip back. And that theme certainly comes through Sharon's book. The quote in this chapter that kind of smacked me was, quote, Sharon says, I want white people to look racism in the eye. It's such a simple sentence, but I think often when I'm talking with people about what we're doing here, about racism in general, there's a little glazing over. There's like, I know racism and it's away from me. It's not me. I'm not dealing with it, particularly in, white communities. And there's a hesitancy for some reason to look racism in the eye, as if it requires an admission of guilt or some sort of sacrifice, this win-lose concept. We don't have to lose anything to learn about and understand racism and to behave differently. So I just encourage everybody to be as brave as they can about looking racism in the eye. We've talked too about the idea of privilege. We're reading a lot about privilege these days, white privilege. And Sharon has this awesome section in her book where she talks about the privileges she doesn't have because her skin is brown-black, right? So it's interesting to see what privileges she doesn't have. So think about yourself. She says, I don't have the privilege of walking tall, unfettered by the color of my skin, in a world where many white people want to make me less than I am. I don't have the privilege of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. My family or I could even be killed because of the color of her skin. I don't have the privilege of forgetting that so many countries were built on and grew rich on enslaved labor. Yet, we still aren't truly free. I don't have the privilege of staying quiet when racists are actively discriminating against people who look like me. White folks will often just stay quiet, be uncomfortable, and try and divert the conversation. But a Black person is going to be harmed in some way. She says, I don't have the privilege of ignoring racist attempts to invalidate my looks, my education, my presence, my very self. I don't have the privilege of withdrawing from the fight to dismantle white supremacy. White people aren't, well, the white people I know, I always have to qualify that, are not thinking about that. They don't have to. You know, that's something else I've learned. If it's not in your face, you don't feel like you have to think about it. I don't have the privilege of waiting around till the death of another Black man causes another wave of outrage. I don't have the privilege of going back to normal. So she ends up with the white world doesn't give me the privilege of ignoring the color of my skin. I remember saying in one of our podcasts that a friend of mine told me this just a few years ago. I never walk out my door without thinking about being Black. And how am I going to get from point A to point B and keep myself and my boys safe throughout the day? That was the first time I'd ever heard that. You can't move around in Black skin and be safe. She also says at the end, so the white world should not have the privilege of ignoring racism, a problem that white people started and white people should finish. I love that, you know, because we talk about how we weren't born when slavery was started, it's not my fault, and so on, but we still benefit from the residual effects of slavery, from the economic results of slavery. We benefit from the fact that as a white person, we can move freely just about anywhere in this world. Mm-hmm. And it's a problem that we do need to finish for other people. I'll say anybody who's non-white, you know, that this is a problem. This is up to us, and it's doable. It's doable. I guess one of the last things I'd like to say about Sharon's book for now is that I would say that this is like a primer for white people. It is so beautifully but simply written that every sentence is a little nugget that you can hang on to. Like, I want white people to look racism in the eye. I don't have the privilege of walking around freely. So I highly recommend the book, I Hate Racism. No, I'm tired of racism, right? Yeah. So any questions from Gail or Anita on that?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Interestingly, you all know my grandson, not the little one, but the big one. So he's about 6'4", and he's 15 years old. So traveling today, taking a flight to New Jersey. And I was talking on the phone to my daughter, and I can't tell you how many times she had to say to people that she was encountering, at least 2 or 3 times, that no, he's only 15. Wow. So the sense is these people are already looking at him as if he were an adult. Where's your ID? Well, he doesn't have ID because he's only 15. Oh my gosh. And that's just a normal, everyday, going to the airport kind of thing. But it reminded me of going back to when we talked about the adultification
Yes.
rate, and this automatic thing that people will often do of seeing somebody like my grandson and making the assumption that they are an adult Black male.
And a threat is what they're thinking too.
Right. Right.
This
They
is
don't see a
threat.
15-year-old. Yeah.
Yeah,
They see a big Black
Yeah.
guy. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
It's just kind of,
That just breaks my heart.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
What is from his perspective, what does that feel like? It has to feel confusing and frustrating and hurtful and
well, we're getting to the point where we're explaining to him why
Yeah.
these are concerns
right.
for us.
Yes.
And
that's the talk, right? That's the talk that you know, don't react, don't get angry, don't. If somebody did that to my son and my son was that tall, I mean, I can't imagine that ever happening, but even though he was tall, they wouldn't look at him and adultify him in that way because he's
Right.
right.
Yeah, so that's just an example that shows
Yeah.
that this whole adultification thing is real. It's
Very real.
It's real. You know, and because it's real, that was just a little bit of the angst that I was feeling.
Sure.
He
All
was
day.
getting on this airplane and all. I mean, it was just a short ride. He's just going to New Jersey. You know, family was on the other end waiting for him and all of that. But it's a lot of things that can happen in 30 minutes, a 30-minute, 40-minute, 50-minute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And is he wondering, like, what am I supposed to be doing differently? Does he ever get I would imagine he gets the sense that like something's not right. What am I supposed to be doing differently?
He doesn't.
He doesn't yet.
Because he's a 15-year-old kid.
Right. He's not going to think beyond
It's
that.
us. Right. It's us
Oh,
with that level of
picking
awareness.
up I see.
He hasn't
It's
experienced
us.
it.
He's just walking through the world
Right.
the way a 15-year-old should be able to walk through the world. Right. Like we talk about with Cairo, freely and peacefully just walking through the world in the skin that you were born in.
Right.
And there's no difference between the two of them.
Yeah.
In terms of innocence and
Right. So he's not fully conscious of stuff, but we are.
Okay. Yeah.
And so hence we're starting to talk to him and
Right.
you know, just tell him certain things and stuff like that. So we have about another maybe 45 seconds or so. Gail, did you want to comment anymore?
No, I'm good. I just reiterating what you're talking about is just, it's so sad. I mean, I just can't even imagine from the perspective of a child or a teenager, 50-year-old still kid, right? That what that must be like, and because he's beginning to get those imprints, right? And yeah, that leads me into the chapter that I chose for from Sharon's book. But I'll talk about that.
And Zane doesn't have the privilege to just walk around.
That's right. Just be a 15-year-old kid.
Just
even
be a
if
15-year-old
I'm
kid.
tall or if I'm kind of gangly or whatever, but I'm just
Yeah. So there's always this little thing. This is what we're getting. What there's always just this little thing in the back of your mind where you're conscious of the fact that you're a Black person walking in these spaces. I mean, he's just now starting to travel a little bit by himself and stuff like that. So we can't like keep him in the house forever. You know,
but driving is coming up, right?
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So we need to take a break at this point. We're at the halfway point. So we will take a break and we'll be back and we'll resume the conversation. So welcome back to Inflection Point podcast, and we are having a book discussion, and the book that we are digging into is I'm Tired of Racism, True Stories of Existing While Black by Sharon Hurley Hall. So I think at this point, I believe it's Gail's turn to kind of take us onto the journey into the chapter that she selected.
The chapter I chose was chapter 17. It's called Showing Up with Our Whole Selves, Why That's Not Always an Option When Working While Black. But the quote that I want to share comes from the beginning of part of that chapter. And what she says is, hiding part of yourself isn't always a conscious decision. Instead, it happens over many microaggressive moments. You know, I work as a therapist, and I've also done a lot of therapy for myself personally, trying to spend my whole life reframing some of the distorted impressions and some of the distorted belief systems that were imprinted onto me in order to be able to remember I came here with everything I needed. I came here being all of who I am. But those microaggressions can begin to chip away and wear away that truth about who each of us are. And they can come from many places. They can come from parents, they can come from aunts, uncles, teachers, other peers, all different sorts of places that they can come from. But what Sharon's talking about is really something that is based on something that she can't change, the color of her skin. And I just hope that everybody can hear what we're all talking about from that perspective with empathy of what that might feel like. I could never say I know exactly what that feels like. I have experienced certain things that might cause me to feel different than and shame or so forth. That was never really my shame, but it's like to wake up every morning. I don't notice the color of my skin. Like I walked out the door, like somebody said, that you don't notice it. But to walk out the front door every day and know that I have to pay attention to the color of my skin, I have to be aware of that because I have to make sure that I'm going to be safe. Let alone have things be fair and equitable in my life. It's beyond comprehension. And it's so based in non-truth that every one of us has a responsibility to look within ourselves and to really challenge some of the beliefs we have or what we may not even be aware that we have, to explore and go a little bit deeper. Talking about how these internalizations of these ideas of wrongness can start very early. And for her, she experienced them as she would go to school. And then people would claim that they didn't understand or know what that was about for her when they would try to pronounce her name, let's say. And they thought that maybe it was, some people that are Black would think that, or some people white would think their name is exotic. And so, but to someone that's Black, an exotic name that they're referencing may just be as simple to a Black person as Mary is or Sam is to somebody that's white. But that focus on something is not unique in a special positive way. It feels unique in a isolating way, right? There's something not okay about that. In college, she talked about when somebody would bring up something related to Black history and she was the only Black person in the class, everyone would turn around and look at her as if she was all of a sudden the historian on all of Black history, which of course she wouldn't be any more than one individual would be. So she experienced these as these little microaggressions that put her in a place of feeling different than and not okay for being this difference. She talks about feeling how to fit into common stereotypes for Black people, and that because she was from the Caribbean, people would often give her looks or comments about her because she's Black and from the Caribbean, especially because of what she was doing in work-wise. She was a journalist and then writing her book, she would often work from home. And just because she happened to live in the Caribbean, that doesn't mean that she's not actually working at a desk and she's not sitting on the beach. And so, but she would get different comments about how much that's, what a great life that must be and how she probably isn't really working, and which is minimizing and diminishing her gifts and her ability and her talents, and that she works very hard. She was in journalism for 15 years prior to even writing articles and writing her book. So she's a well-established professional journalist and author. And yet how easy that is to diminish that by just diminishing the fact that she's Black living in the Caribbean doing her work. You know, that's where she has grown up. She grew up in the Caribbean. She also talked about she would be afraid of letting people hear her accent because they would know that also. And I want you to think about this from that perspective of that. Imagine what that would be like to have to even feel like you have to hide that. She spent most of the time, even when social media got started, hiding her picture because her name is Sharon, she could easily, most people would think that she's white. And so she really finally had to work up the courage to finally start to use her picture. And then she would get the experience and reactions of people being shocked when they saw her picture associated with the work that they had already known and didn't realize that she was Black. So again, all these little microaggressions that are hurtful and maybe not consciously, intentionally hurtful, but they still are. And that's something I think that for white people, we have to be aware of, just like what was been talked about before. And so she, even in being paid, when she was, when they realized that she was Black before, then they thought that she was white. They were paying her more money when they thought she was white than when they found out that she was actually Black. So the discriminations that she's experiencing work-wise was pretty intensive. And as I said before, she's really a very professional writer. She has a journalism background. She works from home, as many people now do work from home. Doesn't matter where that is. You know, I have a woman I know that she's a professional and she has a home in Hawaii. And so when she can work from home, sometimes she'll fly to Hawaii. Well, I would do the same thing. Wouldn't anybody else, right? If you had the opportunity to. Yeah. So I want you just to kind of be aware of how easily those little microaggressions can leave an imprint. You know, we all have had some little experience somewhere in our life where we may have felt that, but this is based on that reality that this is the color of the person's skin. And that's the only difference. It's like saying all of a sudden, because I've got blue eyes, all of a sudden now I'm going to experience this. That wouldn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense either. And it makes sense historically for the purpose and intention of that, of why Black people were often looked at as less than, because they needed that, because they were one of the primary sources of fueling the economy, because of the free labor and so forth. But that's not now, and that wasn't even based in truth back then. So I just hope that people certainly try to find her book, and because it really is it is like a primer, but it's so well written and so easily understood that it's very hard to deny those those awarenesses, so that we can make them more and more conscious for ourselves and how we relate to ourselves and anyone, especially someone that's Black.
I found the book very honest.
Yes, very honest.
The thing that I really liked about it,
Right.
let's not cloud the issue. Let's not pretend like this isn't really what it was. It was very honest, very direct, but not like in a bullying kind of way.
Right.
It wasn't really beating people up or anything like that. It was just, this is the real deal. This is what this feels like to be in this situation. And just thinking about, you know, on the part that you read, hiding part of you isn't always a conscious decision, and instead it happens over many microaggressive moments. And that kind of makes me think about the whole idea of assimilation into like a corporate environment, the things that we have to basically consider. You know, is my hair going to be wrong? Is my hair going to be accepted? Is the way I speak going to be accepted?
And that shouldn't ever be an issue, right? Yeah, I certainly want to live by having that right to just show up as who I am as a whole person. And we all have that right. We all do. And that's really all that Sharon talks about, what she really wants. As Anita, you've talked about. I just want to be able to walk in my life in the skin that I was born in, right? And not have to think about that at all. I don't think about that, nor should you have to think about that. Exactly. And that's what we as white people can begin to do the work within ourselves, to really look at that from the perspective of what's this all about? Where's this coming from?
Yeah. And it relates to the stereotyping.
Right, exactly. It's all stereotyping.
You know, I think we talked a while back about, you know, a Black man who's a policeman might have some respect coming his way. But without that uniform, he's just another Black man in terms of the way he's viewed on the street. And the assumptions we make are just at the least very unfair, and at the worst just criminal, because I would imagine that you can say whether this is on point or not, Anita, but that those are the types of microaggressions a person can feel, a Black person can sense.
Yes.
If they're being stereotyped in some way, or the little things like not making eye contact with a Black person, it just
not saying hello, right?
Such a little, pardon, saying hello,
right?
Yeah, just all those many things that would be so easy for us to change, just to acknowledge people as human beings. Yeah, inside, exactly.
Change within ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she really works towards contributing to Black people who are learning that when you show up as your whole self, as a Black person, you'll no longer be either strange or exotic, as she says. You're just going to be you.
Oh, just going to be you. Yeah.
And you get to that point, because I know I arrived at that point.
Yeah.
When I was still in corporate America, and I'm just like, look, this is just who I am, period.
Right.
Like, period. As my daughter would say, point blank, period. This is just who I am. And I need to be able to bring the wholeness of who I am into my workplace. So I ran across this story about Oprah Winfrey. That really, really resonated with me. When you had mentioned in the beginning of your what you were talking about, Gail, and you talked about the name and how Black names are sometimes considered to be like these exotic names, and whereas to us it's just my name, right? So here's Oprah's story. And I'm reading from this news article. Oprah quit U.S. News show 60 Minutes after she didn't like her instruction on how to pronounce her name. The media mogul joined the weekly news program last year. This is speaking retrospectively, but quickly realized it wasn't the best format for her. I've removed myself from that. It's never a good thing when I have to practice saying my name and have to be told that I have too much emotion in my name. Like, what does that even mean?
What does that even mean?
I don't know. What does that mean? That's
what, like, I don't.
Any way to push back, right?
Right.
Any way to just tamp down.
Tell somebody to say their name differently, or to say it with less emotion, or I mean, the message is that who you are and how you're referencing yourself is not okay.
Right. That's exactly it. Right. It's your identity and the way you identify with yourself doesn't work for us. That's essentially what
yes, exactly.
That just doesn't work for us. So can you fix your name? Can you change your name? Can you say your name a different way? Or just simply accept the fact that this is how I'm going to pronounce your name, because it goes the other way around also, with us having issues with people not even wanting to take the time out to pronounce our names correctly. So I know for me, whenever I'm talking with someone and I see a name that it's a name that I'm unfamiliar with and I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, out of respect for them, I will ask them, can you tell me how to pronounce your name? Because I don't want to mess your name up.
Yes, I do that. Yeah.
Right.
And that's all you have to do. That's simple. Yes.
Yeah, it's that simple. And then you repeat what they say and you should be good to go. But so, these are just examples of those little things that just, like, can we discard the notion and move on from this?
That my name can't work.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting.
Well, it's sad. I mean, it's sad in a way that it needs to change. That's drastically. Who somebody uses their name is who they are. And if somebody doesn't know how to pronounce it, ask and just inquire and learn it, right?
Right.
Everybody would want that.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this earlier today. I think one of the primary issues with where all of these discussions are going now
Mhm.
is the fact that white people are being put on the spot because you have to acknowledge
Yes.
the role that you are playing.
Yes.
And then you also have to acknowledge, where does that role place you when you think about systemic, institutional, and all of that? Where does that role place you? And it's a place, I think we're in a place now of honest,
Mhm.
critical self-reflection that white people have
Yes.
to do. And there's discomfort in that. And so you have some people who will walk into the discomfort and, you know, have a different type of journey. And then there were other people who will make laws that say, don't make me feel uncomfortable.
Right.
Right. So you
Yeah.
got one extreme versus the other extreme. But the point of the matter is, there is so much of a focus now on the behavior of white people, the thinking of white people. What is the role that you as an individual are playing and have been playing for a while? And so it
Hundreds of
takes
years,
people,
yes.
yeah, it takes people a minute to kind of,
Mhm.
whoa, yeah.
Well, it's accountability, right? It's
Yeah. That's
holding
exactly what
people
it
that are
is.
white to be accountable.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But that's not the norm in the
It
United
needs to
States.
be, right.
It's not
It-
necessarily the norm. So
Yeah.
we're kind of
it
going
rem-
against the grain a little bit.
Right. It reminds me of how Americans in particular are so ethnocentric in terms of language. It's as if we expect everyone around the world to speak English and the way we speak it. So why should we be stumbling over someone's name that doesn't roll off our tongue the first time? You
Right.
know, it's like, is that so much to ask? Is it so much to ask?
But that whole thing that you described is bogus. Just think about it.
Right.
Yeah.
When
It's
you go
bogus.
down south, white people
Mhm.
talk one way.
Yeah.
Go to California, white people speaking English
Yes.
speak
All
in
English,
a very
right.
different way. You go to the Northeast, you go to New York, and you've got a different accent altogether, right?
It's true.
I
It's
mean,
true.
so
Even in the state of Nebraska, I can tell where someone's from in the state.
exactly.
You know, there's just a different
Yeah,
pronunciation.
we feel entitled and to
We
expect
feel entitled.
everybody to understand, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
And to
Yes.
learn all those different dialects in that
Mhm.
English language.
Right. And it's just ridiculous. So I don't know about the two of you, but I can honestly say I have a healthy respect for people who can speak multiple languages.
Oh
I
my
had
goodness. Yes.
a friend of mine, this is years and years ago. He could literally speak 5 languages.
Yeah.
So he would have conversations with me where he would talk in English
Mhm.
and then he would switch to Spanish. He would switch to French, like all in one conversation. And I'm sitting there like, I only got like, because I can only speak English. So and then I think it's also revealing the idea
Mhm.
of how shallow
Mhm.
we are in
Yes.
this notion when it comes to
Yes.
language, this notion
Right.
that somehow one language, that doesn't even make sense, that one language just will rise to the top and that will be the language that everybody in the world is supposed to speak, and you can't speak anything else, and you have to speak it like Americans speak it. You can't speak British English either. It's like, you know,
Right.
it's just
Right.
kind of silly to me. It's just silly to me.
It is silly. It's just
To me, it's
ridiculous.
fascinating to really listen to accents and different languages. I was speaking to Deborah, my colleague in Rwanda today, and she was trying to describe to me the effects of inflation there. And she says they have to hold people at the gate. I think she's talking about at the market or something. She says she used the word share, and I said, are people talking about taking more than their share, like hoarding, like we would in the States, like we hoard toilet paper?
Right.
And she said, no, I just said the nice word, I meant steal. You know, and so if you take time to just get to know somebody, to listen, to ask the question. I'm
Right.
not sure I understand. I think it's a delightful journey.
Yeah,
Actually.
It is, yes. Just be
yeah.
curious and be willing to
Be curious.
have an open heart and mind with empathy, you know?
Mhm,
Right. And it
mhm.
expands who you are
That's
as a
right.
person.
Yes,
So
yes.
you're
Gift
not
to
so
yourself,
narrow.
yes,
You
exactly.
don't have this very narrow definition
Right.
of yourself, that you're able to kind of see yourself from a different perspective, or put yourself in a different context, and
Right.
maybe see something different about you.
Mhm. Right.
And that sort of
Even
thing.
learn ways that I can behave better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Because
Right.
sometimes
Right.
when I hear her say that, I think about how overly harsh my language can be, and it doesn't need to be. So
No.
anyway, I love names that are different. I mean, when you think about the number of Johns and Bobs and Susans and so on, it's delightful to break from
Right.
that. And I'll remember them more likely than a name that's very common. So
Yeah.
I guess we're coming up on our
3
Yeah,
minutes.
closing statements.
yeah. We have about 3 more minutes, and I just would like to do our calls to action.
Mhm.
So for those of you who are out there listening to us, if you like this show, what I'd like to do is invite you to join the conversation through our Inflection Point podcast private Facebook group. So you just go on Facebook and look for Inflection Point podcast. But remember, inflection is with an X. So it's INFLEXION point podcast, and join our group. And then that way you can leave comments, ask questions, and all of that, and just really become a part of the conversation. And I will say that this is a very respectable and respectful platform. So we're expecting that people are coming there because they want to know and they want to learn.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yes.
that'll be great.
Yeah.
And did you want to talk about the Spotify and Apple podcast thing too, or
Sure, go ahead.
we got that covered? Yeah. Did you say go ahead? Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm just excited about the fact we just learned today that we're gaining a lot of listeners, and this podcast can be found on a number of different platforms. Video is on YouTube, via Transformation Talk Radio, and then we are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We learned that Spotify is more popular outside of the US, so we are so excited about touching people on this subject all over the world.
Yes. That is exciting. Yeah.
So
And I
go
just
for it,
wanna-
Gail. You got one more minute.
Okay, I just want to throw out, please feel free to go on the website of the nonprofit that I work for, and it's called OMA, OMA, Pittsburgh.org. We are a working volunteer board, and we have a variety of different programs that I would love to have you take a look at. And we also are sponsoring this podcast. And so if you ever feel the desire to want to donate, we would certainly greatly appreciate it. And just go on the website. There's a place that you can click on to donate. And most of all, check out the programs, because there are a variety of different ones for youth and for adults, and a variety of different issues, from trauma to emotional health and wellness. Thank you.
We appreciate you, Oma.
Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
Our sponsors made it possible.
Right.
Yeah.
So for our audience, our listeners, I just want to thank you for joining us, and we will see you the next time on Inflection Point Podcast right here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And for our next episode, you will actually get to hear from Sharon Hurley Hall. She will be our featured author. So we will see you then.
And she is lovely.
Oh,
Yes.
Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here.
Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.